For the third time in a little over a century and a half, the House Judiciary Committee has voted articles of impeachment against the President for abuse of power and obstruction of Congress.
It's a witch hunt. It's a sham. It's a hoax. Nothing was done wrong. Zero was done wrong. It's a scam. You're trivializing impeachment.
For only the third time in more than a century, Congress has once again stepped onto ground that is never entered lightly. The Judiciary Committee has voted to advance articles accusing the President of abusing power and deliberately blocking Congress. Immediately, familiar words filled the air. Witch hunt, hoax, scam. Claims that nothing happened, that nothing was wrong, that the entire process is theater. But those words are usually the loudest right before something serious begins. Picture the atmosphere not as a debate, but as a held breath. A chamber where the tension doesn't explode, it presses inward. When the question is finally asked, not to the public, not to commentators, but directly to the lawmakers themselves, is Donald John Trump guilty or not guilty? The answer doesn't arrive all at once. It comes name by name, voice by voice. Guilty, not guilty. Guilty, not guilty. A rhythm that feels less like politics and more like a jury reading a verdict in slow motion. And that detail matters because despite the grand setting, this wasn't a courthouse. This was Congress deciding whether to reopen the most dangerous constitutional mechanism it has. Here is the part many people rush past too quickly. 140 members of the House voted to push impeachment forward. Not a symbolic handful, not a fringe protest. Nearly a third of the chamber saying clearly that the President should be formally held to account. And this is happening as the 2026 campaign cycle is only beginning to warm up. The political environment is no longer strategic or patient. It feels volatile, like pressure building inside sealed metal. At the center of this push is Representative Al Green of Texas, persistent, methodical, and unwilling to let the issue fade. Over the past year, he has introduced resolution after resolution, each one targeting a different boundary he believes the presidency has crossed. Executive overreach, disregard for congressional authority, military decisions made without consent. But this time, according to Green, something deeper triggered the escalation. Not policy, not procedure, but normalization. Specifically, the normalization of political violence. Green's argument is blunt. When a president jokes about punishment, flirts with violent language, or targets judges and lawmakers rhetorically, the consequences do not stay rhetorical. Lines blur. Supporters feel emboldened. Threats stop being shocking. They become background noise. And suddenly members of Congress from both parties require extra security simply for doing their jobs. That claim alone forces a pause. Because if that environment exists, then something fundamental has already shifted. This is where it becomes important to understand why so many lawmakers acted despite the risks. The House leadership ultimately blocked the resolution from moving forward immediately. Caution prevailed at the top. Some feared backlash. Others worried about alienating swing voters. But 140 members still raised their hands, including moderates from districts where political survival is never guaranteed. That alone signals momentum. This is no longer a theoretical debate confined to activist corners. It is moving into the center of the institution. And now the real dilemma emerges. If the House eventually passes articles of impeachment, the Senate faces a trap with no clean exit. Proceed with a full trial and endure months of headlines, testimony, and forced loyalty tests. Or minimize the process and risk appearing complicit, protecting power rather than principle. Either option carries consequences. A trial stalls legislation, dominates public attention, and forces public defenses that cannot be walked back. Avoidance, on the other hand, risks cementing the idea that accountability stops at party lines. Republican defenses over the past weeks have been fragmented and at times contradictory. Some deny wrongdoing entirely. Others argue the behavior is inappropriate but not impeachable. The result is confusion rather than clarity. And confusion, in moments like this, rarely protects institutions. It exposes them. History matters here. Al Green has been here before. Earlier efforts to impeach Trump struggled to gain traction. Support was thin. The moment passed, but rhetoric escalated. Jokes about imprisoning opponents, statements that blurred threat and humor. Over time, Green's warning about political violence stopped sounding exaggerated and started sounding predictive. That shift explains the surge. It explains why 140 votes now exist where once there were far fewer. This push does not exist in a vacuum, and that is precisely what makes it dangerous for everyone involved. It intersects with a much broader story that has been quietly taking shape for years. Allegations of corruption that never fully disappear. Questions about the use of public resources that resurface again and again. A recurring sense that the rules apply selectively, depending on who holds power at a given moment. Any single accusation, taken on its own, can be waved away, buried under counterclaims, or drowned in the noise of daily politics. But when these elements begin to align, they stop looking like isolated incidents and start resembling a system, a pattern. And patterns are far harder to dismiss because they suggest intention rather than coincidence. Those backing impeachment insist this is not driven by anger or revenge, and not by the desire for spectacle. They frame it as something colder and more structural. A reminder that even the most powerful office in the country is not absolute. That authority is granted, not inherited, and can be challenged. This is where an uncomfortable question emerges, one that many ask but few say out loud. Does impeachment actually change anything if conviction is unlikely? History offers a sobering answer. Removal is rare. Trump has already survived the process twice. But impeachment was never only about removal. It is about creating a record. Votes are counted. Statements are preserved. Positions are locked into history. Lawmakers cannot later claim uncertainty or distance. When the time comes, those records resurface. They influence elections, define reputations, and shape how power is remembered. Accountability, in this sense, operates slowly through memory rather than immediacy. Some senators are undoubtedly hoping the House hesitates, that the process stalls before it reaches their chamber, sparing them from a choice that could alienate voters on either side. Others will continue to dismiss the entire effort as partisan theater, hoping repetition turns dismissal into truth. But momentum behaves differently than opinion. Once it reaches a critical mass, it no longer needs constant justification. Trying to avoid it becomes a statement of its own. Silence starts to speak. There is another layer here that often slips past public attention. Impeachment is not just a constitutional tool, it is a signal. It draws a boundary and says this matters, even if the outcome is uncertain. It tells the public that threats against lawmakers are not normal background noise. That language has consequences. That power has edges. And as elections draw closer, attention itself becomes a form of leverage. Democrats are wagering that sustained focus will reframe Trump not as a one-off controversy, but as a consistent pattern of behavior. Trump, for his part, understands this dynamic well. He knows how to convert scrutiny into fuel, how to present himself as besieged, how to turn institutional pressure into personal loyalty. That is the gamble. Handle the message poorly, and the effort hardens his base rather than weakens it. Yet 140 votes alter the balance. This is no longer an isolated protest or a symbolic gesture fading into the background. It is a coordinated block with measurable institutional weight. That is why this moment extends beyond headlines and talking points. It raises fundamental questions about whether Congress still has the capacity to restrain a presidency that openly tests limits, whether political threats become normalized through repetition or rejected through action, whether accountability is a functioning principle or a ceremonial word. What follows will be anything but orderly. More resolutions will appear, speeches will escalate, procedural fights will multiply. The Senate will eventually be forced to engage, either by holding a trial or by explaining why it refuses to do so. In either case, consequences follow. Careers will be reshaped. Trust will erode further. Power will be examined under pressure, and there will be no clean resolution, no moment where the system resets itself. Al Green continues to apply pressure methodically and without retreat. Trump continues to lean into the rhetoric that created this collision in the first place. Congress moves forward across unstable ground where every step risks backlash from one direction or another. One reality cannot be ignored. 140 members of the House have already said yes. That single fact changes the landscape. What happens next? How the Senate responds, how supporters mobilize, and how voters interpret these signals will define the next chapter of American politics. It is volatile, it is unresolved, and it is nowhere near its end.